What if I told you there is a machine that can aim magnetic pulses at your brain while you sit awake, fully clothed, not in a secret bunker, not under anesthesia, and definitely not inside Professor X's basement? And no, before your conspiracy uncle starts sweating through his Facebook account, this is not mind control. This is transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, a real, clinical, non-invasive brain treatment used especially for depression and, in some cases, OCD, migraine, and smoking cessation. Mayo Clinic describes it as using magnetic fields to stimulate nerve cells in the brain, particularly when other depression treatments have not worked well. So today, we go down the rabbit hole. From electromagnetism to the architecture of sadness to the strange fact that a clicking magnet outside your skull can sometimes help a suffering mind inside it. And the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. The sci-fi lie versus the medical truth. Hollywood hears magnetic brain stimulation and says, "Excellent, we shall now erase his memories, rewrite his loyalties, and make him buy 12 cans of soup." Real medicine hears magnetic brain stimulation and says, maybe this can help someone whose depression hasn't improved enough with standard treatment. That difference matters because TMS is not designed to implant thoughts, extract secrets, or turn anybody into a government-controlled jazz pianist. It is therapeutic neuromodulation, altering activity in specific brain circuits in a controlled medical setting. Mayo Clinic explicitly describes TMS as non-invasive, meaning no surgery and no cutting into the skull. That alone is remarkable. For centuries, the human brain was like a locked palace wrapped in bone. You could observe behavior, you could guess, you could pray, you could write very confident books with very questionable diagrams. But directly influencing brain circuits without opening the skull? That sounded impossible. Then physics walked in holding a magnet. How a magnet can reach the brain. Here's the basic trick. A TMS device places an electromagnetic coil against the scalp. When current runs through the coil, it creates a rapidly changing magnetic field. That magnetic field passes through the skull and induces tiny electrical currents in the brain tissue beneath it. Translation? The magnet doesn't read your mind, it nudges neurons. Think of it less like hacking a supercomputer and more like knocking on the door of a sleepy network and saying, "Hello, please start acting like a functioning circuit again." This is why TMS is often aimed at regions involved in mood regulation, especially parts of the prefrontal cortex. Mayo Clinic notes that the treatment targets nerve cells involved in mood control. Now pause there, because this is where the story gets profound. Depression is not just feeling sad. That description is like calling a hurricane a windy inconvenience. Major depression can involve altered activity across brain networks related to mood, attention, reward, motivation, and cognitive control. TMS does not solve every case, and it is not magic, but the clinical idea is that by stimulating underactive or dysregulated circuits, you may help restore healthier patterns of brain activity. NIMH lists rTMS among brain stimulation therapies used for depression and notes newer protocols that can work more quickly in some patients. In other words, the machine is not controlling the mind. It is trying to help a wounded network remember how to sing. Why TMS exists at all. Here is the painful truth nobody should make light of. For some people, depression does not politely leave after a pep talk, a walk outside, or the advice to just think positive. Some people try medication, some try therapy, some try both. Some improve, some partially improve, and some feel like they are dragging a piano through a swamp while the world tells them to smile. That is where TMS entered the clinical conversation. Mayo Clinic says TMS is usually used when other depression treatments haven't been effective.
NIMH also includes TMS among established brain stimulation therapies and notes FDA-cleared uses have expanded over time. So TMS is not typically the first hammer pulled from the toolbox. It's more like the specialist tool brought in after the standard equipment has not done enough. And this is one of the great themes of modern medicine. When suffering becomes stubborn, medicine gets creative. Not reckless, creative. What a TMS session actually looks like. Let's kill another myth right now. A TMS session does not usually look like Frankenstein's tax accountant got promoted. You are generally awake. It is usually done in an outpatient setting. No anesthesia, no surgical incision, no dramatic clear moment with sparks flying across the room. The patient sits in a chair while the coil is positioned on the head. The machine delivers pulses in patterns set by treatment protocol. Mayo Clinic describes it as non-invasive and performed without surgery. For depression, OCD, and smoking cessation, it is often delivered as repetitive TMS, or rTMS. And yes, it makes clicking sounds, because apparently the future sounds less like angelic choirs and more like a very determined woodpecker with a medical license. Some protocols require sessions over several weeks, while newer accelerated forms aim to shorten the timeline. NIMH reports that the FDA has cleared a rapid-acting form of rTMS for treatment-resistant depression, and that accelerated protocols can compress treatment length while showing similar effectiveness. That matters for one simple reason. When you are depressed, time itself can feel heavy. Anything that safely shortens the road to relief is worth serious attention. What TMS is actually used for? Now let's be precise. TMS is best known for major depression, especially when previous treatments haven't worked enough. Mayo Clinic says it is FDA approved for major depression and also notes FDA approval for OCD, migraines, and smoking cessation and help people stop smoking when standard treatments have not worked well. The FDA separately announced clearance of a TMS device for obsessive-compulsive disorder in 2018. NIMH also reports that in March 2024, the FDA cleared rTMS as an adjunctive treatment for depression in adolescents 15 and older, which shows how the clinical footprint of the technology is still evolving. Now, this is the part where the internet gets sloppy. People hear that TMS is being studied or used for various conditions and immediately leap to, so basically, magnets can cure anything, including my bad decisions in 2014. No, TMS is a real clinical tool with specific indications, protocols, and limitations. This is not rub a crystal on it medicine. This is regulated neuromodulation. And that distinction is the difference between science and merchandise. Does it hurt? Is it dangerous? Here is the honest answer. TMS is generally considered well tolerated, but it is not a spa treatment for your frontal lobe. Common side effects include headache and scalp discomfort. NIMH interview with Sarah Lisenby notes that headache is one of the most common side effects and that scalp pain or discomfort is also common. Mayo Clinic also lists temporary scalp discomfort, headache, tingling, and lightheadedness among side effects. Serious risks are rarer, but they exist. Seizures are a known but uncommon risk, which is why screening and clinical supervision matter. The safety literature and policy summaries note seizure as a potential adverse event, though uncommon. This is how real medicine sounds. Not perfect, not miraculous, not zero risk, but measured, supervised, and evidence-based. And let me say something important here. A lot of people are more comfortable with a wild lie than a careful truth. The wild lie says, magnets on the brain, terrifying. This must be some secret military wizardry. The careful truth says, no, it's a clinically used treatment with specific benefits, specific risks, and specific patients for whom it may help. The careful truth is less cinematic. It is also more useful. Why this feels like mind control even when it isn't. Now we go deeper. Why do people instinctively hear brain stimulation and think mind control? because the brain is the throne room. It's where memory lives, where fear echoes, where desire bargains, where grief lingers, where hope sometimes goes missing. So when you learn that external energy can alter brain activity, it feels metaphysically illegal. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Your brain is already being modulated all the time, by sleep, by stress, by trauma, by caffeine, by social rejection, by hormones, by grief, by medication, by a text message from the wrong person at 11:48 p.m. TMS is different because it is deliberate, targeted, protocol-driven, measured. Not all influence is mind control. Sometimes it is therapy. That's the conceptual leap the audience has to make. A pacemaker is not heart control in the sinister sense. A cochlear implant is not ear domination. TMS is not a scheme to hijack free will. It is a tool meant to help
Dysregulated brain circuits function better. That doesn't make it trivial. It makes it profound, because it means the border between physics and emotion is thinner than most people think. The history rabbit hole. To appreciate TMS, you have to appreciate the older dream behind it. Can electricity and magnetism reveal the logic of life? Michael Faraday showed that changing magnetic fields can induce electrical currents. That was 19th century physics. Fast forward, and human neuroscience realizes something astonishing. The brain itself is an electrical organ, not metaphorically, literally. Neurons fire through electrochemical signaling. Networks oscillate. Timing matters. Circuits matter. So if magnetic fields can induce current, and current can influence neural activity, then perhaps magnetism can be used not just to observe the brain, but to gently perturb it. And that is the path that eventually led to TMS. The rabbit hole here is delicious. Victorian electromagnetism meets modern psychiatry inside a device that clicks at your forehead while trying to relieve despair. If that doesn't sound like science fiction that escaped into a hospital, I don't know what does. What TMS can't do. Now, let's place some guardrails before the comments section mutates into a lizard convention. TMS cannot read your private thoughts, upload information like a USB stick, force obedience, or transform you into an assassin activated by hearing smooth jazz in a grocery store. It is not precision telepathy. It is not fantasy neuroscience. It does not override personhood. The actual clinical claim is much narrower and much more credible. Modulating targeted brain circuits may reduce symptoms in some patients under defined protocols. And honestly, the real thing is interesting enough. We do not need to decorate it with nonsense. The human heart of the story. Let's step away from the machine for a moment, because the real story here is not the coil. It is the person in the chair. The person who has tried to keep going. The person who is tired of being tired. The person who can't explain to friends why getting out of bed feels like lifting a cathedral. For that person, TMS is not a cool gadget. It is not a cyberpunk accessory. It is a question. A dangerous, fragile, precious question. What if this helps? And medicine, at its best, exists to answer that question with rigor instead of hype. Not every patient responds. Not every study says the same thing. And evidence has evolved over time, with older reviews showing mixed results and newer protocols improving the landscape. That is how science works. It refines, it tests, it fails forward, it gets less poetic and more correct. And yet, beneath all the statistics is something timeless. A civilization learning how to reach suffering people through the language of biology. Now, here is the deepest tunnel in the rabbit hole. If a magnetic pulse can change mood, what does that say about consciousness? What does it say about despair, about identity, about the self we think is purely us?
This does not mean human beings are nothing but wiring. That would be a lazy conclusion. But it does mean our inner life is inseparably tied to physical processes. The soul may write poetry, but neurons still hold the pen. TMS sits right at that unsettling intersection where biology meets mystery. And that is why it fascinates people, because it suggests that some forms of suffering are not just moral failures, not just weak character, not just bad attitude. Sometimes the circuit is hurting. Sometimes the system needs help. Sometimes healing sounds like a clicking magnet. So no, transcranial magnetic stimulation is not mind control. It is something both less dramatic and more extraordinary. A real medical technology that uses magnetic pulses from the outside the skull to influence brain circuits involved in illness, especially depression. It is non-invasive, clinically used, and increasingly refined, while still carrying limits, risks, and unanswered questions. The science fiction version asks, can we control the human mind? The medical version asks something far more humane. Can we relieve human suffering? And in that difference, you can hear the future choosing what kind of power it wants to become. If this story bent your brain in the best way, drop a comment. Magnets, not mind control. And subscribe, because the future is already here, and most people are still calling it impossible.